Welcome, everybody, to this month's Workforce Wednesday. I'm Wayne Crandall. I am your host for today. We are going to hear some challenges and best practices for coordinating your IET programs from Yoelia Nava down you're in Region 1, right?
Correct.
All right, in Region 1. Before we get started, I do want to go over some housekeeping for um, our Zoom session. Remember, you have your little floating control panel down on the bottom. That's where you can tell whether your mic is on or not. If there's a red slash through it, then we can't hear you. You're going to have to undo it. If it's not red slash and we can't hear you, then there's a good chance that you're having some audio difficulties. You can use that little caret to control which of the microphone devices are going on there. If you're not having any luck with that, you can either call the DPDT call center and they will help you, or you can send a private message to Megan Webb, who is my co-host and working hard behind the scenes to make sure everything goes as smoothly as it can. Next to that, you'll also see a little video icon. As a general rule, we have people leave it off to preserve bandwidth. If you turn it on, we're not going to make you turn it off. But if you do start seeing that you're having poor quality and people are stuttering and stammering, then if you cut your video feed off, then it will usually help with poor internet. Make sure you have your participant pod open. You can tell who is in here with us today. Your name will be the very top one on the list. That name needs to be what you're known as in the PD portal so that we can give you credit for today. So if that is not the name that it shows, then go ahead and change that. Megan is going to drop in a little direction thing in the chat to help you do that. If you can't figure out how to get it done, then you can drop your name into the chat and we will try to get your name changed for you. If we can't tell who you are, you're not going to get credit. You'll still get the knowledge, but you won't have the PD credit. You also want to make sure that you have your chat pod open so you can keep track of all the little things that are being said, people asking questions, people making comments. At the end of this session, Yoelia is going to drop a PDF copy of her presentation in there, so you'll be able to go back and see the hyperlinks that she's dropped in there for various tools that she's talking about. You do have some reaction buttons there. Use them appropriately as you deem. Remember that when you put your hand up, it stays up until you put it down. The other ones will come up for a few seconds and then they'll go away. We are not doing any polls or quizzes or breakouts, so we're going to keep it relatively easy for you today. With that, I am going to turn it over to Yoelia and let her enlighten us.
Thank you. Did you need me to keep my camera on or off?
That is totally up to you.
Okay. All right. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Yoelia Nava, and I'm currently serving as the grant director for the Region 1 Education Service Center. So we are here today for our Workforce Wednesday, and we are going to be talking about the challenges and best practices for coordinating IET programs. I was explaining earlier, my experience with this comes from being a CTE director, which is a career and technical education director for a public school system for the last 10 years. So I do have experience working with training providers out in the public school system and just have adapted all of that information to integrate the various components and ensure that they are integrated as part of the offerings that we have for IET in our adult education programs. Okay, so moving along for today, we are going to go ahead and review the learning objectives for today. The first one is that we're going to be evaluating practical approaches for selecting career training programs that align with our student needs, our labor market demand, and also our grant priorities. Learning objective 2 will demonstrate how to maximize the available funding streams to support your IET development and sustainability. 3, we're going to talk about strategies for building strong partnerships with your training providers to ensure that you have a successful program or programs. 4, we'll apply the grant requirements to ensure that we're incorporating all the required IET components into your program design. 5, we'll utilize effective methods for tracking student progress and outcomes, and I'll share a little bit of how we do that here in our program. 6, we'll also analyze real-world examples and tools that you can adapt to strengthen your programs as you are planning, delivering them, and also reporting the outcomes. So first and foremost, let's go over program selection. If you're not aware, in Texas, we have 28 workforce development areas as shown in the map. And so these local workforce development boards are local or regional organizations in each state and U.S. territory that oversee and coordinate public workforce development programs and services across the state. In Texas, we have 28 local boards that operate, and they operate over 180 workforce solutions offices. So ours in specific has several workforce solutions offices that operate here in our area. And you, as part of an individual that works with adult education, should be aware of what area you pertain to and should know who you are to connect with for that partnership and also resource sharing. In this slide, like we mentioned earlier, we will be providing a copy of the PowerPoint presentation. I have listed all of the workforce areas with the relevant links to your area, so you can figure out which one belongs to you, and that way you can have that website accessible and are able to see the services and supports that you can potentially receive from them. So this is the listing. Here is the example of ours, and I have actually clipped out a little bit of the information because what we're after is the information on the target and in-demand occupations for your area. And these will vary depending on where you reside across the state. This clipping is, like I mentioned, from the one in mine that really encompasses 3 different counties that we serve. And ours just happen to be aligned. So the counties that are served by our workforce area are actually the exact same ones that are serviced by our grant, but that may or may not be the case for your area. And so that is some of the research that you'll have to do on your end to figure out whether there's 100% correlation, or maybe you're working with 2 different ones so that you can get the information that you need. So that information is housed somewhere on their website, or should be. And so in this example, we can see that if I go to their website under Workforce Intelligence, this is where they have the link for the target occupations. Once that is clicked, then you're able to, or we are able to see the listing, the most recent, which is the 2025 versions for the target occupation list and the in-demand occupation lists. And so in your board's website, they may or may not have it exactly listed with these drop downs. They do look a little different. So, but what ultimately you are after is that link of where they are posting both of these lists, as this is what will inform what programs you should be focusing on. So moving on to talk a little bit more about the target and demand occupations, then the difference between those. The high demand occupations, that list is going to include jobs that are projected to have a large number of openings in your workforce development area. And that is important because we want to understand what are those jobs that have a lot of positions available, that are those occupations that most people are being hired into. That is the big goal of the high demand occupations list. The second list is the target occupations. And so that list is a subset of the high demand occupations that the local workforce development boards supply. And they identify not only the high demand occupations, but also high wage. And those occupations actually have that potential for strong career advancement. And so that is a second list that you will see. And these are the two that you will use to help inform your program selections. These lists, and this one in particular, the target, and both actually they are determined locally by the workforce board based on the labor market data in that area, employer input, and regional priorities. So you do need to understand that whatever I showcase here, this is my example on my area, but they will and may vary depending on where you reside. So now let's look at some of the information that's on these documents, as all of this is going to well inform your decisions on your program offerings. This is the sample of the target occupations list, and I'm going to go through a couple of these fields here to understand, help you understand what they mean and how you use this information to help inform your program offerings. The first one is this SOC code. And so if you notice, it's located over here on the very far left of the screen, and that code stands for the Standard Occupations Classification Code. So this is a federal system that is developed by the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics that is used to classify workers into occupational categories. And so each of those occupations has a unique 6-digit code that is assigned to it. And when you look at those lists, both the high demand and the target occupations from your workforce area, that number is included for various reasons. One of them is it's to ensure that everyone is referring to the same exact occupation, even when the job titles may vary locally. Secondly, training programs, labor market data, and wage reports can be consistently aligned using those codes. And lastly, grant-funded training programs like ours and WIOA can be tracked to those specific occupations. And it is important to note that as you're developing that, your programs, that is the code that you will use to input into your career training services that we'll talk a little bit later about. So let's review some additional information that's on this document. So first was that SOC code. Secondly, you will see the description of the occupation next. Then you will see the 2024 jobs and 20 through 2020 or 2034 jobs. So those are actual numbers of positions that are expected to be available in those different occupations. Then you have your annual openings per year and the median wage. So all of that is really good information for you to look at as you're trying to make decisions about what programs to offer, as it is super important to highlight those and ensure that you are in well alignment with offering these specific training programs to help alleviate some of the need that is in your area, and also ensure that the students, as they graduate, will actually have that opportunity to find employment and also look at more or less the expectation for the wage after they complete your program. Before we go into the final two pieces that are in this information, I do want to quickly talk about the contracted measures for TWC, which are those exit-based outcomes. So as per the performance guide, TWC performance guide, all of the exit-based measures are calculated once a participant exits the AEL program. And so that's important to note. So it's after they finish the program, and it's not just IET, it's any program, including the ESL and HSC programs if you offer them. Students are included and tracked. So these measures, unlike the MSGs, are not necessarily based on program year timelines and calculations. They're upon completion, program completion. And those measures include the employed enrolled Q2 post-exit and the employed enrolled Q2 to Q4 post-exit. And I also referenced the WIOA exit-based measure, which is very similar, the employment rate Q2 after exit and the Q4 after exit. So the important piece of information here is, once again, I'll reiterate this the extreme importance of selecting training programs that will help us with these exit-based outcomes. That is the primary reason to hone in and use these lists to ensure that you are setting students up for success and your program ultimately up for success. As you are selecting them, there is no point in offering a program that is actually not going to offer that student and your program that opportunity to find employment upon completion. The other two components that are listed on the list are the industry sectors. So that is in here in this example, it starts off with healthcare practitioners and technical employment or occupations. And the last one is the educational levels required for those actual occupations that are listed. And so let's go over those just a little bit. So the workforce development areas often have these different groupings to make the lists more practical. The industry sectors could be divided up by healthcare, manufacturing, information technology, construction, and so forth. So those are some examples, and you will see them, and they may not correlate 100% on both lists. So which means that just because you have construction occupations on one list, they may or may not be on the other. It all goes down to do they fall within in demand and or target. The second one is the educational levels. And so some of the levels that you will see as we quickly saw on that previous slide is whether the program typically requires a high school diploma or an equivalent, whether it's a post-secondary non-degree award type of occupation, whether it requires some college or no degree, or an actual degree such as an associate's, a bachelor's, master's, or doctoral professional degree. So the best practice when looking at these lists is ultimately to focus on those programs that students can realistically complete within the time frame of your grant. And so an example of that is the degree ones. So if you see some of those occupations on the list that require an associate's degree, a bachelor's, master's, doctoral professional degree, then you can pretty much know that more than likely it's going to be unrealistic for a student to finalize that within a program year, a grant program year. And so it is best practice to take really high note of those educational levels to ensure that you are selecting those ones that are going to best align with your needs of your program. That's not to say that maybe you don't want to select some of the longer ones, but that's totally something that your program needs to make a decision on. Okay, so do we want to stop and see if there's any questions so far before we go on to the second area, or do we want to continue?
I'm not seeing any questions in here. There was one request about the PowerPoint, but we told them we were gonna drop that in at the end.
Excellent. All right, so we're going to move on to maximizing funding for our IT programs. So when you start planning and trying to figure out which programs you want to offer, first you start with the list, you review the list. It's a good idea to have your career navigator maybe look at that. I don't know if you have other individuals that are involved with the process, but have that be something maybe that gets done through that individual. Then that individual is going to quickly ask how much funding do we have available to operate our programs. And so that information can typically be obtained from the grant director. And so that is something that was budgeted. And so that is information you'll need to know to be able to make a decision on which and how many programs you will be able to offer. Secondly, you will need to determine the training providers that are available to provide those programs in your area and decide which ones you're going to be reaching out to. And so one of the tools that you can use, a good resource, is the TWC eligibility training providers list. Now, it is my understanding that this eligible training provider list is primarily utilized by the Title I programs or the workforce areas that actually fund or can only fund those eligible training providers on these lists. So for us, we can use them as a resource, but you can also go outside of these training providers. Us as a service center, we do strictly use the list to help us determine which providers we can use, but that's not the do all say all. Secondly, you also want to develop a list of questions that you're going to ask these individuals once you decide which ones you're reaching out to, so that you can obtain the information that you need to help you make that decision on who you are going to partner with. And I will provide some of that information here on the next slide. And lastly, you want to meet with those training providers to determine what they have to offer. And we're going to talk a little bit about that here in a few minutes. The whole idea is that you are going to try to negotiate to obviously try to maximize the funding that you have allocated for your IET program. So the important questions that you need to ask. And so as a previous CT director, this was part of the process that we would also do to help determine when we had that need to outsource some of our training out into the community, we would ask a series of questions. So the first question, I'm going to go through these pretty quickly. The first question is, are they accredited? Who is their accreditation body? What certifications are going to be awarded once you decide, okay, this is the program, let's say CNA. If you're trying to offer CNA, you need to know exactly what is the certification and make sure that both of your program and the training provider are full aware of what it is that they're going to be offering. Because a lot of individuals in my previous experience tend to confuse a certification with a certificate. And so there has to be a very clear distinction and understanding between both parties as to exactly what are students going to obtain once they finish the program. And what is the renewal date for these? And so an example of a certificate would be the student finishes the program and they get a certificate of completion for the program. Well, that's one thing very different from a certificate or certification for the BLS, for example, the basic life support, which is not necessarily the credential. So the actual credential for the program would be the CNA, the Certified Nurse Assistant. And so you need to make sure that both, again, your program and the career training provider are well aware of the distinction between those and how you will use those for reporting purposes in your IET program. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. Then you also want to ask them about the program cost and the pricing structure that they have. And the information here would entail the full cost, what is included in that, and pricing structure could be if we offer multiple cohorts, would that pricing change, or is it the same regardless of how many students they're servicing. Then you also want to ask about their percent pass, their performance. So if they're certifying students, what is that exam performance rate? That is extremely important, and it's everybody pretty much tracks that. That is how they sell their program. That's how they advertise it and try to recruit additional students, is because they're proud of that percent. So what is that percent? You want to know that. Then the scope of service. What exactly is included in that price that they're going to quote you? You want to know, full disclosure. Then, is there a skills component required for that program, like CNA? Is it just the instruction, the curriculum delivery, or is there any practical experiences that are going to be included? And if it is it included in the price or is it not included? Again, full understanding and full disclosure so that you know exactly what you are paying for. Then on the examination, what is the mode of the examination? Is it on paper? Will it be online? Is there skill testing components involved in that or not? The certification exam, when students are ready to take that certification exam, where will it take place? Is it on site? Will it be online? Is it through other approved testing centers? In our experience, we have some that are certified to do testing at their sites. They're an approved testing center, some are not. And so you want to know that because some of them may require traveling. And so if you're in a site that doesn't have approved testing centers, we all know Pearson VUE is a big supplier of testing administrations. And so are those located near your site, or students going to be traveling far away to get to those testing facilities? Then the curriculum. What about the curriculum? Is that going to be included in the cost per student, or is that going to be extra? You need to know that. You also need to know, is there any other program materials that are going to be a part of the program delivery? And are those included, or will you need to supply those? Examples of those would be like for the CNA, and I'll continue to use that example, is scrubs. For example, are the scrubs a part of the cost, or is that something that you need to figure out how you will cover those for students? Or is it something that you are going to require the student supply? Or stethoscopes, things like that. You need to know exactly where does that cost, where is it going to lie, on which end, on your program, on the training provider, or the student. The program length. So you need to use this information to help you evaluate how many cohorts, if you select this training provider, you can offer within your program year. So that is an important piece of information. You also need to know the start and the end dates. And is the training provider willing to customize those for your program? We have had providers that have their official start and end dates, and that's what it is. You cannot change them. But then we work with others that are willing to customize programs to us. So they'll say, okay, so you have a need for this program. We can start one anytime that you need. You just let us know, and then we can customize that timeline for us. The class days and times, same type of thing. Do they have very specific days and times that they can offer the classes? Again, we all understand that when it comes to providing services, we have specific staff that we have earmarked for these programs. Is that the case for them? Or do they have additional available staff that can be tapped into to provide customized schedules to meet our needs of our program? Then we have the student eligibility requirements. For example, is the high school or diploma or high school equivalency required? That's important to note. For the great majority, actually, all of the ones, actually except two, this CNA and the welding for us do not necessarily require the HSC, the high school diploma or the high school equivalency with the career training provider that we have. But that could be different. We have to understand that when career training providers are delivering their programs, they too have metrics that they need to meet. And so one of them is placement, employment placements a lot of times. And if they're trying to place students and their experience, they are not having success with placing students that don't have a high school diploma or high school equivalency, they may require it even though that profession typically does not. And so that's something that you need to know in talking to these career training providers and making that decision of whether you will partner with them or not. Then the available training locations. Will that training provider come to your location to offer the training, or are your students going to go to theirs? And I say that, although it may be a simple answer, it might be, well, it seems like it's always going to be at their location. Not always. You have some programs that don't require a high intensity of equipment use, supplies, and things like that, that it may be an option for them to come to you. If it's something that just requires computer and a software that may be open source or something like that, that would be an example of something that maybe you can consider bringing the training provider to you. But that's something, again, that you need to discuss with them and figure out how that will work. Then next, you have to ask about the seats available per cohort, and not only the maximum, but also the minimum. And the reason that's important is because a lot of training providers will not secure a teacher if you don't meet that minimum threshold of students. And if it's just 5 or 6, let's say for a CNA, they may not do it. You might need to recruit some additional students to make sure that you meet that requirement that they're asking. Typically, it's about 10 students, but it could vary by training provider. Then you also want to find out, do they provide job placement services? If they do, what does that process entail? Is it something that is automatically given to them before they exit the program, or is it something students will have to seek after they leave? Is there a center, a career center, or something that they need to tap into? So those are things that you would need to know so that you can be well informed and, again, compare apples to apples as you're trying to make decisions as to which training providers are going to be the best fit for your program. Then last, you also want to find out what other available services, support services they provide. For example, maybe they have tutoring that is offered by the instructor or maybe by the entity. For example, if you partner with colleges, typically colleges have centers that help provide tutorials. So is that the case for the programs that you are looking into, or is that not something that is available? Oh, there's one more, sorry. The last one is references and their contact information. Please make sure that you ask them for this. This is something that they readily have available, as far as maybe school districts they've worked with or other programs, maybe employers in the community that they have worked with to train their employees. So you want to ask for that information and make sure to call those individuals. They're the ones that are going to give you the true information as to whether this is a good partnership for you to try to establish or not. All right, so continuing on the maximizing your funding. What we did here in our program is we actually developed a spreadsheet to establish projections. So once you have the amount of money that you have available, and then figure out what that cost is for these different training providers, then you want to try to map out, okay, what realistically could I offer to make my program work? And so I do want to make sure that once I do say before I move on is when you're tallying all of the responses from these individuals, it's a good idea to kind of put them side by side. So what we did is we established a spreadsheet and titled on the bottom, for example, CNA, and then these list of series of questions were here on the far left, and then each column represented one of the training providers and then the responses, so that you can across the board be looking at those different elements that we were talking about here. And so what certifications are offered, what is the cost structure, all of those things, and you can easily see those and then finalize, okay, this is the one or two training providers that I'm going to focus in on to pursue a partnership with. So once you do that, then you're looking at this spreadsheet is a different spreadsheet. So everything's about tracking. I mean, it's once you have all your information well tracked, it's easy to kind of maintain that. This spreadsheet is specifically to make the projection of once you finalize a selection of who you're going with, you're going to have that cost already for what it's going to cost you for that program. So once you do that, you want to ensure that you have developed this spreadsheet to state, okay, this is a training provider we have selected. This is the program, for example, CNA. This is where the classes are going to be offered. Here are who are the teachers that you have selected for the AL activities and workforce preparation course, just so that you have that handy with the understanding that the actual training is the partner that you selected. Then when are those class start dates, the end dates, what is that program length for the one that you selected, what is the actual student count, the cost per student, and the total program cost. So this is going to be the spreadsheet that you use to ensure that you understand that the money that you have is going to be enough to help you meet that number that you have to meet for your program. The last one is the max student per cohort. So you want to make sure that you understand if it's 10 and you have 8, well, that's not going to work. You've got to get to that number at least. And then if they say 10 to 12, you know that you have that little wiggle room there. The class status is the last one that we have here. And so once you develop this spreadsheet, you want to ensure that you keep track of, okay, these classes are already active, these ones are pending to start, or these ones are completed. It's a good way to see what's coming. The whole point of this spreadsheet is to ensure, like I mentioned just a few minutes ago, that that contracted IET enrollment target that you have will be met with the number of students that you can realistically serve with that available budget and with your grant year timeframe. That's ultimately what you want to find. You want to find that balance. And so if you have a set limit of funds, so you need to be able to get to that number, right? So you almost have to play a little game, a balancing game here to try to figure out, okay, maybe I can't afford that program because it's too costly. Maybe I can do 2 of this other one. And so that is the whole point of this spreadsheet, is to figure out, can you ultimately meet that enrollment target? And if not, how are you going to do that? I will say, and I didn't put it here in the presentation, but another resource that you can leverage is to do co-enrollment with your workforce solutions offices. And so they do have funding available also for career training. But I will say in that respect that it's a lot of coordination that you're going to have to do with them because their timelines run a little bit different. So when the student actually applies with them to want to enroll in a career training program with using the Title I funds, which is the Workforce Solution funds, they run on different timelines. And so will you have enough students at the same time to be able to start the cohort? And that's the only piece of caution that you're going to have to kind of work through that to figure out whether you are going to be able to do the co-enrollment using those Title I funds on top of your AEL Title II. All right. So far, so good. Do we have any questions?
We did have a couple of questions.
Okay,
Ms. Smith said, well, will there be a breakdown to where to find the list of requirements for programs? I'm not sure exactly what that was attached to.
that might be a question on the program requirements.
Yeah, I'm assuming that would be a TWC question.
Okay, and I don't know if she means specifically for the training provider or for us as the program, because the training provider will have their actual requirements, right? Those you have to follow or else you can't partner. But you as a program could have additional ones on top of that, depending on, again, your program and what you decide. For example, so CNA. So the training provider may say, no, we do not require it, but then you as a program decide that, you know what, you are going to because you are looking for students to finalize their HSE and then move them into career training. That could be an example of that. I'm not saying you have to do that, but that could be an example of how you would have a different requirement than the career training provider may have. I don't know if that
Yeah.
answers your question or not.
And the other question was, are there MOUs or internal waivers available concerning the necessity of having an HSC diploma?
Repeat that one more time.
Are there MOUs or internal waivers available concerning the necessity of having a high school diploma?
Okay, so the way that we utilize MOUs, and I'll talk a little bit about those as part of the process, I don't know that it's necessarily a waiver. That is, again, a programmatic decision that you'll have to make, obviously meeting the requirements of the career training provider, but then you have to make that decision on your end and be very fully transparent of what those requirements are going to be. So when you make that MOU, you do want to delineate that in your MOU so that there is a full understanding of what your program is requiring, whether it's the same or on top of the requirements that the career training provider may have. And so I don't know if that answers the question, but we'll talk a little bit more about MOUs here in a few minutes.
And that catches us up on the questions.
Okay, perfect. All right, so moving along. So now strategies for successfully successful provider collaborations. So when you are trying to make contact with these career training providers, you want to make sure that you put your best foot forward like anything else, right? And so some of those things, and I'm going to briefly go over them, is to do your homework. So you want to research their programs ahead in advance. You want to see what credentials they provide and the outcomes before reaching out. So although those are part of the questions that you're going to be asking, you pretty much already should have a little bit of an idea. You shouldn't go to them for the very first time. It's like, well, tell me everything about your programs, because that might turn into a long session, and when our time is valuable, right? We want to make sure that we get to the point as to what exactly we are after. Secondly, you want to understand their capacity, their student populations that they serve, and their schedules. So most of that information, some of it or most of it, may already be on their websites. Again, these are training providers that are typically open to the public, and so a lot of that information they need to make accessible so that students can easily find and follow that as they are trying to make decisions whether they're going to be attending. Secondly, you want to clearly define the goals and the expectations for your program. You want to explain that your IET program offerings are aligned with labor market data. A lot of times, when we partner and we have conversations with our training providers, they're looking to offer you additional programs, right? And so I have this one and I have this one, but you need to, from the very get-go, have them understand what we just previously talked about as to how you make the selections of which programs that you're going to be offering. Although they may have a series of so many more, if they're not already aligning to your in demand or high demand and target, then that's not something that maybe is worth even talking about. And so you need to make sure that they understand that. Then secondly, is you want to also outline the program objectives, the expected student outcomes, and the roles and responsibilities up front. And so as we're going through all this information, it's kind of going to self-develop those roles. What are my responsibilities? What are your responsibilities as a career training provider? And so we want to be very upfront about those from the get-go. We also want to clarify how the partnership will support both your IET program and their training goals and the provider's training goals. Like I mentioned earlier, they have their own metrics that they are also looking to fulfill, and it should be a win-win for both parties, right? It shouldn't just be a win for one or the other, but for both at the same time mutually. Continuing on the tips is discussing compliance and the reporting requirements. This one is huge. And this one is something that you need to delineate in your communication and in your, not only in your verbal, but in your written communication with them. So we need to ensure that the providers understand the TWC-AO grant requirements, including the various IET components, which we'll talk about here in a few minutes. And so secondly, that you need to also clarify the expectation for the data collection. As we know, there's a lot of data collection when it comes to IET programs, with you having to report that all in teams, and also the student progress and the tracking of the students and all of the related timelines as to when certain things need to be turned in. So that needs to be very clear. Then you also want to problem solve together. And so just because the training providers have their set schedules, that doesn't mean, again, that you don't have that opportunity to try to develop something outside of that if they're open and willing to do that. Discussing the possibilities to make adjustments also to the curriculum or to the timeline. And adjustments to the curriculum may also entail maybe adding some additional components to ensure students are reviewing certain concepts that maybe they're not understanding a little more, which may turn into the timeline being extended. And so that is actually what happened with a couple of our programs as we discussed it. The employer or not the employer, the training provider quickly realized that our students were needing a little more time. So he calls me up and says, Yuelia, is it okay that we extend the program a couple more weeks because we are noticing that students are needing a little bit more of that review? And absolutely, we want to do that. And so that is part of you building that solid communication with them and strong communication so that those discussions can easily flow and be had. Then collaborating to establish that schedule that will work for both of the students and your program. So that is important, again, like I talked about previously. Discussing the logistics for the orientation and the registration sessions. So that's important to also to problem solve together. As we know, the career training providers have their programs that they're running at their facilities, and they may or may not be open for you to go in and recruit from their sites and also hold some of these sessions at their sites. And that not only includes the orientation and the registration process, but also some of those other components of the IET, which include the AEL activities and the workforce prep. So could that be a possibility? And we have a combination of both. We do some of the orientations here at our center and the registration, some we do at theirs. Same thing with the contextualized instruction as part of the AEL activities and the workforce prep. Some we do here, and some they're open to having us there as well. And so those are conversations that you can have with them and problem solve together. At the end of the day, it's to make it easier for the students, guys. That's what it's about. And so those are important conversations to be had. Working collaboratively again to find solutions while keeping student success a priority. And that's the main goal here, is ensuring that students ultimately at the end of the day are going to be successful. A couple more tips is negotiating the program cost. And so don't be afraid to do that. And you don't want to do that at the very beginning. You want to kind of do all these other things. This was very strategically put together in this way. Because once they find out that you have grant money, the conversation will change immediately. And so they're going to tell you all of these other components that we just talked about and all of the information that they have. But then when they find out that you have a grant, things could change. They're like, oh, okay, well, they don't really have to do a whole lot, right, to get this funding. It may be that they're willing to negotiate a little more and change the pricing structure or include a couple of other things to ensure that now they have a solid stream of students coming in because we're going to be doing a lot of the work. That doesn't mean that they won't do any recruiting, because that's another thing that you also want to make sure that they help you support that process. So don't be afraid to share the TWC approved cost per participant for career training programs. And so that, because they will ask you, well, what's your number, right? What do I need to be at? And so don't be afraid to share that, and also to clarify that you will be comparing costs with other training providers. Just because you're having a conversation with them doesn't mean that they're the only ones, right? That you're going to be having these or posing these series of questions to. At the end of the day, you want to make sure that you have a good balance between the cost and the service that they're going to provide you. And cheaper is not always better. Not always. A lot of times we tend to think that, but not always. And again, we'll go back to all those questions that you're asking. Is it going to meet the needs of your students? We found when we've done a little bit of that comparison that there's some that are drastically lower, but then the students are totally learning on their own. Something that may require skills practice. And so just because, the price is very low, and that may not be the best fit for your students. So you got to also consider that. Discuss the payment terms. That's important too. All of these things, again, will go into the MOU, all of these components, and to ensure that there is a good understanding of when are we paying you. Typically, it's upon services being rendered, but there are some times where the training provider may want something maybe at the midway point, which we also have done. And so it just depends on what your business office requires or allows for, and what you're willing to do as well. Then be sure to capture all of the negotiated terms in writing via contract or an MOU. You may want to ask your business office, purchasing, one of those departments that manages all of this process, do they have a standard boilerplate form? We do, and so whether that be an MOU, a contract, federal contract, services, whatever they call it, there is probably something there. And so you want to make sure that you're following your entity's guidelines for that process, because you can develop your own and then later find out, well, no, we have a standard boilerplate one that we use and you need to follow this one. So you want to make sure that you are well aware of what that is. Then we want to also continue to foster that transparent communication and follow up as needed. So when you have that initial contact with them, again, you're very upfront about what you're about and what you're seeking in terms of these programs, and you may have that need to have follow-up once you go through the process of talking to the different various training providers. For example, for CNA, then you might have some follow-ups because this one said one thing and they offer this. Well, if you find this one as one that maybe you're leaning to, do you provide this? There's another one that another training provider that provides such and such. That could be something like, for example, the scrubs. Are you willing? Maybe they were the one that you're leaning towards is not. Or is that something that you can include? And so those are things that you can do, and don't feel like you can't, because again, you're the steward of these funds, and you want to make sure that we're trying to maximize them as much as possible. So if you set up those follow-up meetings, you may need to discuss the decision you've made and the potential partnership. So make sure you let them know when you make contact with vendors or these training providers. They want to know where they stand. At the end of the day, if you told them that you were going to be meeting with additional ones, they want to know were they the selected one or not. And so you want to be transparent about that, and that way they don't keep calling and trying to get a status update as to where they stand. And again, they may be willing to negotiate some things, and at the end of the day, maybe they were your second one, and maybe they rise to the top if you just continue those conversations with them. And lastly, on the transparent communication is to be sure that you have any follow-up questions ready to help you make that final decision. So if there is something again that maybe you found elsewhere or you thought of later, make sure that you have those handy to help you make that final decision. Any questions there before I move on to the next piece?
Looks like we're good.
All righty. All right, so then applying the IET program component. So that's the next section here. So as we know, and we should know, when we're talking about IET programs, or maybe you're new, so we'll use this as a little bit of review. The IET program is encompassed by three different types of components. One is the AAL activities. Two is the actual workforce training that the career training providers are going to provide. So that middle one is what all of this conversation has been about, this one. But you also need to supplement that with the AO activities. This is the contextualized instructions for your students, and then the workforce preparation for your students to ensure that they can seamlessly transition after they have finished the training into a job. Right? So all of these are required. They're not optional. You have to have them, and which is why it's here. I love this little graphic that was shared in one of the presentations for IET that really summarize the three components, and they're pretty much working together to ensure that you fulfill the requirements of an IET program. That is on the AL letter 0216 change 1. And so when I share this PowerPoint, you actually can click on it and it automatically will link over to the AL letter in case you need that. The components are three, like we mentioned. You need to ensure that every time you set up one of these IT programs, all of the components are built into it. Two, you want to ensure that you complete the Integrated Education and Training Career Pathway Survey for each of the programs you will be offering. That is also hyperlinked here, so you can do that either on paper or online. And going through the process of answering this question, guys, will actually help you go through all of the pieces that you need answered to help you make that decision as to what you are going to determine as an MSG, as a credential, and all and so forth, all of that process to ensure you're not missing anything. And then lastly, you need to also ensure that you follow the instructions that are on the desk A that is called setting up training services in Teams so that you can correctly enter all of those training services and maintain compliance with all the reporting requirements and support the accurate student tracking. That is a very important piece, and that just ensures that all of those three components are there. And so you need to make sure that you tie them together in Teams, and there is that desk aid available. Okay, questions there?
I don't see any in the chat.
All right, all right. And how am I doing on time? Let's see, good, okay. All right, so the next component is student progress and outcome tracking. So this is huge as well. As we know with IET, with those three components, required components, and there's a lot of information that needs to be tracked when it comes to IET. So we want to make sure that we capture it all. What we did as a program is to develop an IET program data tracker with one tab for each career training program. And I'm going to go over the elements that we have in it. I'm not necessarily showcasing it because it does have a lot of student information on it, but if you're good with Excel, if you notice we use Excel a lot in tracking our IET programs, this should be a simple task for you. So when you make that tracker, you want to capture the student's name, the duration of the program that they're enrolled in, the class names. This is, when I say class names, is because remember we have the three, so we want to make sure that you have that handy as far as how you title that in Teams so that you can easily look those up. Then the career training provider that you are utilizing, the cohort number in case you offer multiple within one grant year, that you keep those separately, cohort 1 students, cohort 2 students, and they may also vary because you may have 2 training providers maybe that you're using, so that you don't put them all with one. If you're having a lot of interest, you might have 2 or 3 training providers. We actually do have several for our CNA program. Then we have the 12-hour completion indicator. Has the student completed the 12 hours to ensure that they become a participant? And that's important because you don't want to be offering all of this career training, which again, the career training part, or I haven't said that, the career training part is not actually, does not help with your 12-hour. And so you need to make sure that students become an actual participant, and you're not providing all of this for really, and you're not going to be able to get credit for them. Also, you need to track the status of the program completion and all of those related documents. So the example here, or the data pieces, are the status of the MSG attainment and the document as proof of that MSG. What is that? You're going to establish that in that career survey. What is the MSG? And do you have proof of that MSG? And the second piece is the status of that certification attainment and the document as proof. So that's the credential. That's different than the MSG. And so do you have that proof? You need to keep that in the student file, and that way you can also report it and have that evidence to support what you keyed into Teams. Then you also want to track the employment status and what is that student's employer. That will also help with that, the outcomes that we talked about after completing programs. And so it is important to obtain that information. Like I mentioned earlier, a lot of the career training providers have this as their own metrics. So they are very proud to say 80, 90% of our students that finish our program have been employed or are employed. And so this is something that you also want to make sure that you try to select and leverage that as something that you consider when you are selecting the training provider you want to go with, because they're already doing that work. So leverage that to your benefit. And then any notes. So as you are keying this information in, is there anything you need to follow up on, or any notes on that student? So the bolded pieces are bolded intentionally. They're in bold type because they're reported for each student. All of those other fields can be merged together in your spreadsheet for that entire cohort. So you will see the participant's name, and then these are all in CNA. This is the class name for those, the training provider, and the cohort number, but then everything else after that is going to be specific to the student, whether they've obtained the 12 hours, whether you have that, whether they've completed the MSG and the certification, and that you have the proof, and then the employment. Are they employed, and who is that employer? So that is how we have done our spreadsheet. So that has served us very well, and it's an easy tracker. I will caution that if you put too many fields on the tracker, sometimes it turns into more work, and it's kind of hard to update. And so I would try to keep it as simple as you can, but also as concise as you can to get the information that you need to be able to follow up accordingly on the students that may be pending some of these elements, so that you can report everything in Teams. All right. Any questions so far?
I'm not seeing any.
All right, so we're nearing the end, so we're doing good. Okay, so the last piece is the learning from the real world examples. So I mentioned as part of the learning objectives that I'd show you some examples of some of what we've done. And so I do want to say here that all of these informations are examples for your reference. They're not intended for you to use as the be-all information here. It is important for you to customize these examples to meet the program needs of your organization. And so it is also extremely important to ensure that your staff and your students fully understand the requirements of each of the programs that you select to offer. So therefore, you need to make it a point to have this information readily available. You may post it on your website for students to see and staff to see. You want to develop maybe custom flyers to have that information be readily available and as an easy reference, because as you know, you get a lot of calls and a lot of walk-ins asking about your programs, and it's very easy for anybody to pick up that flyer or reference somebody to the website where all of this information is already there and posted. You also want to be cognizant about customizing your orientations for each of these career training programs to really delineate the requirements for the program, the expectations for the program, and all of that information within there, and not just have one orientation for all of the different programs that you offer. So some of our flyers, so I will showcase a couple of those. I didn't put them all here, but this is an example of the one I've been referencing, CNA. So something that is catchy, but also provides that ability to provide the information that you need your customers to know. In this example, we have our information here as far as we are the training provider. We also have the name of the program and the certifications that will be offered, a little bit of blurb on what the program is, the eligibility criteria, where we are going to be conducting these enrollment sessions or registration sessions, and it clearly here stating that attending one of them is sufficient. And notice they're in different areas because these are all different locations for our career training providers. So we actually leverage their facilities, using their facilities to help us with the registration process. And then if there are any questions, where they can call to get that information. And then a little blurb on the bottom as to more information will be discussed once they get there to the orientation, as far as what the program entails a little more, the criteria, the components of the program, the requirements to get in, dates, and all of that information will be covered in the actual orientation sessions. Here's another one for our medical assistant. And so it is totally up to you whether you do this process or not, but I would highly encourage it. These flyers have been very, very useful for our program, and not only for customers to see, but also our internal staff to be well aware of what those requirements are. And that's really the biggest piece, is because the requirements may change. So if you see on both of these and compare these two, they both obviously will require for students to be interested in the healthcare arena. Also valid work authorization, because as students finish, you need them to be able to work and exercise that certification that they will obtain. But notice here, this one we said it's encouraged, the GED, but not required, whereas this one does require that, as it does not say encouraged but not required. And then the additional criteria. So this may vary. These are pretty similar in that they're both healthcare, but they will and may vary if you are offering different programs that may not be in the same industry sector. Then the following slides is something, our examples, again, something that you can use to customize your IET orientation presentations. Like I mentioned earlier, it's a good idea to customize them and not just have one, because students, if they're there for a medical type of program, it may be different requirements or different information that they would need to do or know about compared to something maybe in welding. So that's a good idea to customize, why to customize. So in our presentations, we like to let the students know why are you here, which is a program that you are going to be looking at right now. As far as the information that we're going to be covering, what is the actual MSG you're going to be obtaining from the program, and what is that industry recognized credential or certification that ultimately, if you complete it successfully, that you will be receiving at the end of the program. We also like to provide a little more information on the program description, and I have also gone above and beyond and found a little program video that is available that kind of helps explain what are the skills that the students would be learning about if they decide to enroll. And this is very important. And the reason why is, and not only in these programs, but in my previous work, oftentimes students would say, well, I want to go into this profession, or I want to go into this program, not really having a full understanding of what that means. And so what is actually entailed. And the example we use a lot, and that you probably also use, is students seeking healthcare, but they actually have patient contact and they can't see blood. Well, they need to know that, right? But there's other programs in the healthcare that might be more the medical billing and coding, where it's the back end and working on the computer and the billing side, that may not require that. So they need to be able to visualize themselves. Do I see myself doing what's on that video? And that's the important part of that. I'm going to go through these super, super quick because I know we're running out of time. Is the program requirements. You want to delineate what those are. Again, some of these were what's on the flyer, but you want to reiterate that and have that opportunity for them to ask questions. The cost of the program, if your program is offering everything free to students, they need to know that. But if there is a minor fee that students would need to maybe incur as part of maybe uniforms or vaccinations, you want to disclose that and be upfront about that. Additional information about the program, whether the classes are in person, online, the program length, weekdays, all of that information needs to be fully disclosed. Available support services, all of the information on the workforce prep, job placement assistance, whether it's available or not, whether it's through you or that collaboration with workforce solutions, and so forth. I'm going through this really quickly, but it is here on the PowerPoint. I'm just on the next one's just going to provide you the quick slides on the measurable skills gains and the industry certifications for the other programs that we offer. So we have medical assistant, we offer medical billing and coding here, pharmacy technician, the CDL Class A, CDL Class B. We also offer entry-level welding and the electrical apprenticeship as well. So those are the ones that we offer. And I think I barely made it to the 1:30 mark. Are there any questions or anything else that you all may have for me?
Well, you only went over by 1 minute, so that is really, really good. That was a lot of information. I
Yes.
went ahead and dropped the PDF of your presentation in the chat. There's also a QR code and evaluation link. If you guys could go and do the evaluation and go through. And we do have one question from Linda Ross. What is your student vetting process? Probably not a lot of time to answer that, but that was the question.
So the vetting process is really, once we determine the eligibility criteria, that is the criteria. So we need to standardize that and ensure, like I mentioned, that everybody's well aware of what that is. So there's no blurred lines and students feel like, well, you're letting them in, but not me. So that is a good question. And we need to make sure that as you establish those, that you are well aware of what that is for your organization and ensuring that everybody's on the same page as that. And that could vary, like I mentioned earlier. Any other questions?
I think that we've got all the questions. Thank you very much for your time and effort. For the folks that are going, you can go ahead and sign out. It'll take us a couple, 3, 4, 5 days to process the attendance, and then your certificate should show up. If it hasn't showed up in a week or so, then reach out to the PD portal team and see what's going on.
Thank you
Okay?
so much. Well, if there's anything else I can help with, you all just let me know and I'm here to help. Thank you.